I love when you find a basic garment and it has some cool detail or styling and it makes you question the entire nature of this garment that you thought you knew. As a proper West Coast kid, my go-to uniform growing up was an oversized hoodie with board shorts. It's like cold in the AC, but then you go outside and it's super hot. I am ever so slightly more sophisticated now, but not much. I am obsessed with insertion lace. I just love that it's this thing that pops up over and over again throughout history, and it's like every era has its way of making it its own. Its way of making it its own. Its own? Anyway, I feel like if we take an iconic garment and combine it with this timeless, beloved craft, we're bound to get something cool, right? When making an iconic garment, like a hoodie, it's important to remember the codes that make that garment what it is, and not just a shirt with a hood. To me, that's the knit, cut, and sew jersey material with the brushed back, the folded rib at the cuff and hem, the double hand pocket at center front, and I guess the hood, obviously. You can mess with some of that, but the more codes that are in place, the more the thing will read hoodie. There was a lot of development that I will oversimplify starting now. I have the luxury of a knitting machine, don't look at the mess down there. So I made the knit panels fully fashioned using 2 ends of viscose cotton blended yarn and 2 ends of tech viscose yarn that has some stretch to it. Making it fully fashioned also automatically makes it zero waste, so cool. Much to my disappointment, the lace was not integrated into the knitting process, but I did find a way of applying it in a more integrated way. I chose a layout for the lace that emphasized the lines of the hoodie. I took measurements from the oversized hoodie that I basically lived in this winter, and took it in a bit because the knitting machine was only so big. I used the stitches and rows per inch from my tension swatch, and applied them to the measurements from the hoodie to make a pattern. I applied the lace to live stitches, which meant casting on with waste yarn for about 20 or so rows. Has the added benefit of making sure the needles are working and getting past the warping at the beginning of the piece. And switched to the correct yarn blend. I knit many, many rows. This was at the full knitting bed width. I shaped the underarm, didn't get it on camera, but not to worry, there are plenty of opportunities to see a shaping stitch in this video. When I got to the neckline, I pushed out the needles that will become the neck dip and the shoulder opposite the carriage, put the carriage on hold, and knit the first shoulder with the neckline shaping. I shaped using a 3-prong tool, which put a fully fashioned shaping detail along the neck edge. All about getting credit for my work. Once I was done with the first shoulder and it was off the machine, I put the neck dip needles back in play and cast them off. I knit the second shoulder with neckline shaping in reverse. To secure the live stitches, I switched to waste yarn, knit a few rows, and went over it with an empty carriage to drop it from the machine. Just ignore the bloke in the corner, he's for later. The neckline was super wide, but that allowed for the insertion lace, so it was fine. I knit the 2 sides of the hoodie in a similar way. I shaped the back of the hood and ended the top with waste yarn. The sleeve was similar again, but I shaped it throughout because wrists are smaller than shoulders. This was the pocket, you get it. My ribber wasn't having its best day, so there was some struggle, but we got there in the end. I have found most knitters are very particular in the way they block. Not me. I just press the thing flat, try to get the edges straight, and that has always served me fine. I sourced this cotton Cluny lace from everyone's favorite Nottingham lace dealer on Etsy. It was heftier than the normal fine lace I use for insertions, but held up nicely with the knit, and reminded me of the 16th century laces I was partially inspired by. Oh, and yeah, this was all I had left by the end. Insertion order is important. I began with the shoulder. Using a grafting stitch, I attached the net lace to one edge of the shoulder, picking up the live stitches from the waist yarn and looping up through the edge of the lace. Kind of wish I'd used a more contrasty waist yarn. I then matched the corresponding shoulder edge and grafted. I removed the waist yarn to leave a perfectly integrated edge. I inserted the lace to one side of the other shoulder, then added the lace to the neck edge. This was a scalloped lace that was meant for an edge. Not ideal, but the lace seller was out of one of my laces, so compromises had to be made. This wasn't a live edge, but I still used a grafting stitch. Not as clean as the live stitches method. There was a little nub to the back, but not too bad. To prepare the hood, I added lace to one center back edge, going up the back and across the top, then connected the corresponding center back edge. I added a wide scalloped lace edge to the outer edge of the hoodie. I attached the bottom edge of the hood to the neck edge lace. To prepare the sleeve, I attached the net lace to the upper sleeve cap and to the wrist edge. I added the rib to the bottom by going through the live stitches on the back, then the cast-on edge at the front to double the rib. I don't know why, but my sleeve came out awkwardly short. Luckily, I had this cotton lace panel that I otherwise didn't know what to do with. I stitched the net lace on top of it, then whipped the scallops down to the back. I matched the sleeve cap to the arm side and stitched the shoulder edge to the lace panel. This is the pieciest seam on the thing, but it's fine. I matched the first sleeve seam down the body and hand-linked the seam as one, stitch by stitch. With the one side seam done, I added the wider lace to the bottom edge. I'm not sure why this edge was any different than the other live edges, but I decided to remove the waist yarn first and live dangerously with all the open stitches. I prepared the pocket by adding lace to the openings at the sides. I very carefully matched it to the front of the body. To make sure it was centered, I linked from the center out. I couldn't reliably match the stitches through the waist yarn, so again, I threw caution to the wind, removed the waist yarn, and linked them while they were open. This kind of one-to-one perfectly aligned stitching soothes something in my jaded soul. I linked the small bottom side portion of the pocket. I removed the waist yarn from the top and meticulously matched up the grid of the stitches to make sure the top pocket stitches were in the correct place. You may say, what a pain in the foot. I say, look at the one thing I can control in this fluffed up world. Tomato, tomato. I turned the lace in and whipped it down. I linked the second side seam. No pants seems to be going strong, but no. Let's make a bottom for this. Okay, I realized that board shorts may be an American thing. Board shorts are shorts that are used usually for swimming or like surfing or whatever. For the record, I did board in my board shorts, but it was usually skate, not surf. They're made of nylon or poly or whatever so that they're fast drying. Sometimes they have a drawstring like an athletic short, but often they have a very specific placket that sort of like flaps shut and then laces closed. Lacing, get it? Kind of cool, right? Not even going to pretend to make mine functional to swim in, but I do want to use the styling. I want to use insertion lace. I have a very fine insertion lace that I want to use for the board shorts. And then I have some old vintage bed sheets that I'm never going to use again. There's a lot of nostalgia at play with this whole look, if you hadn't noticed. And if there is one thing that I associate with summer more than super comfy clothes, it is the old 1970s bed sheets that my family used well into the 90s. I began with my handy pant sloper and cut off the top 2 inches to be the waistband. I removed the width of the lace from the side seams and made the length short enough to accommodate 1.5 inches of lace and a 4-inch fabric panel, and still stop just above the knee. Really should have looked at the board shorts in my closet. Instead, I winged the complex waistband. I created a panel to go at center front and overlapped the waistband 1.5 inches to each side. It was kind of correct, but more on that in a bit. I cut 1 leg's worth of panels from this green and pink flowered bedsheet, and the other leg from this rose bedsheet. I stitched a waist dart to the back panel. I marked the 1/2-inch seam allowance of the side seams of the pants in pencil and matched a delicate cotton lace to the line. The early morning sun is particularly dramatic this time of year. I stitched just to the inside of the edge of the lace. It is important with this kind of insertion to be super accurate. I pressed the seam allowance to the inside. I matched the other side of the lace to the corresponding back side seam, stitched, pressed, then stitched just along the edge of the lace. If done accurately, this will catch the seam allowance and keep it in place. Yes, the seam allowance is raw to the inside, but this is a tightly woven material and it didn't seem to bother the Edwardians. I didn't get the length quite right, so I marked out an additional 3¼ inches from the bottom of the leg and used that as my stitch line for the insertion lace. I trimmed away all the excess. I used the upper decorative border of the rose sheet as my bottom panel for the leg. I marked 1/2 inch from the upper edge of the border and cut. Off camera, I'd added another narrow insertion lace and stitched the panel to the bottom. I pressed the seam allowance to the back and stitched right along the incredibly unforgiving edge. I matched the inseams wrong sides together. Those aren't mismatched, by the way. The back inseam is meant to be slightly longer than the front to create some ease in the back of the leg. I stitched the side seam and cut the seam allowance as close as I dared. I turned the leg inside out, pressed the seam, and stitched again to create a French seam. Yes, you can use a French seam. With both legs done, I turned one inside out and stuffed it inside the other, matched up the crotch seam wrong sides together, and stitched. I stitched the center front waistband flap inside out, clipped the corners, flipped it, and pressed the edges. I gave it a top stitch. Top stitching is pretty standard on board shorts. I cut the waistband in 2 halves, so I matched them at center back and stitched. I then matched the self and facing right sides together and stitched along the sides and top. I clipped the rounded edges and corners, flipped it right side out, and pressed the edges. I marked 3 eyelets along the waistband ends. I hand-stitched the eyelets, rejoicing in there only being 6 total as opposed to my last project. Okay, here's where I went off-piste from board shorts canon. I matched the flap to center front, right sides together, and stitched only the self of the flap to the pants. I then matched the waistband to the pants at center back and stitched the self. I then realized I should have stitched the waistband first and then the flap. I then realized I wouldn't be able to stitch the facing over the raw edge as I had planned, so I clipped the waistband facing seam allowance where the flap began and used the flap facing to cover that portion and the waistband facing to cover the rest. I turned the seam allowance of the facings inward and ladder stitched the folded edge to the waistband seam. I top stitched around the waistband. Okay, so actual board shorts have the front of the waistband that overlaps the flap open and free, and the side of the flap is attached to the inside of the waistband, so the flap as we know it isn't a flap, but the ends of the waistband are flaps. Whatever, my way worked. Nostalgia is a funny little thing. I'm starting to realize that historicism is cool, and sure there's fantasy and escapism that happen when we see or wear clothes of a bygone era, but all of that is powerless without some kind of nostalgia. We love things that make us remember a version of ourselves, especially if that version of ourselves wasn't concerned with a FICA score or scholarly output. This is the second full look in the collection. I'll also mention that there will be a video or 2 on accessories, but that is a future adventure. If you enjoyed this video, I always appreciate a thumbs up, and hit subscribe if you sometimes just want to be a kid again. I have another video partially completed. Look at me being all ahead of schedule. And gosh, more ideas than I know what to do with. Well, that's a lie, I know exactly what to do with them. Anyway, until next time, bye.